Welcome everybody. I'm going to start by reading a quote by one of my favorite visionary architects, Paulo Solari, which is appropriate. I'm here with my partner, Christina. She's from Italy. And my daughter, Francesca, who's also now from Italy. She's a Roman, as I have become. So she might participate in the talk. So Paulo Solari says, the validity of information is not so much measured by weight, time, or space extension, but by the threads it offers for connections within the condition of man. If information offers these connections, I call it environmental information. If it is incapable of them, I call it synthetic information. The psychosomatic structure of man himself defines these two kinds of information. The synthetic or the abstract on the one hand, and the environmental or ecological on the other. The synthetic tends to be a monopoly of the brain and is stored in its archives, whereas the environmental acts pervasively and is experienced. And I wanted to share this quote because this one thing that he says about threads. I think threads is a really important concept to talk about media and information and education, because what I see right now in terms of the battle of the marketers for the minds of America's youth is this battle for authenticity. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to find those threads within us, and they're not doing a very good job. Through education and through gatherings like this offers truly what I think he's talking about in terms of ecological information, threads, ecological threads, because in this room I see all these different threads that are related to my life and that have contributed to this book. For example, Ed and Nancy Rubovitz were at Verde Valley School, which my book is dedicated to. It was because of Verde Valley School that I lived with the Hopi family as part of my educational experience, and it changed my life. And one of the experiences I had at Hopi is the primary premise of my book, which I'll share with you in a minute. And then Mark Erickson is one of my former colleagues from the Santa Fe Indian School, and he and I did some amazing projects working with the Pueblo of San Ildefonso, going into the environment, working with kids using GPS and digital media to document what was going on in their forests and in their watersheds, so that they could know what was happening with their land and they could prove what was there in case they had a problem with the government. So those particular experiences had a big impact on my thinking about education and about media. And also the Ecoversity. In my acknowledgments I say that one of the primary influences of my thinking for my book was through the dialogues I had with Francis Harwood, the founder of the Ecoversity. So I wanted to tell a few stories just to introduce where my mind is at, where I'm coming from, and it'll help explain the context for the ideas that are in my book. Basically, in 1996, I was living in Taos, and I was really down and out. I was going through my Saturn return. My life was really on the brink of collapse. I was on the verge of bankruptcy. I didn't know what I was doing. I had a magazine distribution company. I had sold it. I was a little bit lost. I was out of money. And I got a little email from a Zapatista listserv. And it was still around the time, this was 96, where the Zapatistas were still in the news a lot, and they were sending out a lot of communiques. And there was this little announcement for a bioregional gathering in Tepoztlan, Mexico, south of Mexico City. And you know, sometimes this little voice in your head, in your heart, really says, "Okay, I've got to go, and I don't care how much money I have or what my situation is. I'm going to this." And so it turned out I had enough space on my credit card. I got on a plane, flew to Mexico City, took the bus to Tepoztlan, and had this incredible heart-blowing experience with these bioregional activists from all over the Americas. And I didn't even know what bioregionalism was. It was a completely new concept to me. So the way that this event was structured was it was half ceremonial, half Congress, half convention, mix of ecologists, environmental people, shamans, rainbow tribe from Mexico, rainbow tribe from the US. It was a real clash and melding. It was a very intense time. And during that week, I met Frances Harwood. And I told her about my situation, about my miserable life in Taos, and the kindness of her heart, her Buddhist heart. She said, you can come live in my house in Santa Fe until you find some work and you can get yourself back together. And so I took her up on the offer. I moved down from Taos. I lived in her house. And during that time, it was really the early stages of the web. And so one of the things I did in exchange for rent was to help Fizz develop some web projects that never really took off because, as RP mentioned, we were a little bit ahead of the movement, and we had created this infrastructure for sharing information, but people weren't really using the internet at that point. So we kind of plugged away on trying to meld the ecological education with the web, and meanwhile she was having all these dinner parties with these permaculture, bioregional people coming over. And this was school for me. I didn't know any of these concepts or these ideas, and I was learning all this new information and having these incredible discussions. And then Fizz was starting to manifest at school, and I was involved with her writing the ideas, developing the proposals, and going through various different permutations of what this school was going to become. And I was always really charged by our meetings. When she lived in Chimayo, we would go up and spend the afternoon out on the deck looking out over her big pond, and we'd have these beautiful lunches and just dream about the future and what are we going to do about this situation that we're in, this horrible situation that we find ourselves, this reality that gets people pessimistic and depressed. And I always believed in what she had to say or what she wanted to do. Meanwhile, I was really involved with media literacy, which is kind of diametrically opposed to environmentalism in a lot of ways, because media literacy is about analyzing advertisements, film, television, which to me is very environmental, but because it's technological, I've found that there's been some resistance to this idea of media literacy coming from the ecological side of activism. In particular, I went to the Bioregional Conference and had a discussion with a very important media or environmental activist who takes the extreme view that media should be eliminated, which I respect his point of view. And I wanted to talk to him because he had written so much about this. And I said, I think the pioneers and the ecology movement in general could use media literacy because it's a great way to talk about ecological issues, and you can deconstruct the messages of the oil companies and the car companies and use that as an educational tool. And if I had my computer here, I could show you some ads to give you examples of why advertising is such a great pedagogical tool to teach about these particular connections and issues. And I was a little surprised by his response. He said, I agree media literacy is a good idea, but I'm against it. And I said, well, why? And he said, because it makes media more interesting, and therefore I can't support it because he doesn't want people to be engaged with media.
Is that gerrymander?
Yes. Yeah, you can guess. I was a little surprised by his response, but I decided that I was going to mull it over and think about it. And I actually started to question whether or not I was doing the enemy's bidding. Because the truth is, it does make media interesting. I mean, if I watch television, the ads fascinate me because I'm deconstructing everything and I'm looking at all the different threads that are happening in terms of the ideology that's being communicated. So it becomes a different kind of entertainment. But meanwhile, as a media literacy educator working with kids, I know how media has been such a fantastic tool to teach about all kinds of issues, from smoking to health to violence, issues about sexuality, gender identification, because the media reflects all the dominant paradigm issues that exist in our society for us to look at and to examine. And if we accept Marshall McLuhan's idea that media are extensions, in some respects, media extend a lot of the things that are part of the dominant paradigm of the past several hundred, or we could say even 2,000 years of human development.